Welcome to today's webinar. This is Josh. I'm going to be your presenter today. It is promptly noon Eastern time here. We're going to go ahead and get started in just a couple minutes. A few technical things before we get started. If you've got a single monitor, click on the little red arrow on the sidebar of your webinar control panel. It allows you to minimize that, get the full visual effect of our presentation today. Or if you've got two or more monitors, drag that control panel off to the second desktop just to get it out of the way. We're going to be together here till no later than 20 minutes after 12 here, noon. May wrap up a little bit sooner than that. We'll see, depending on how much the topic takes up of our time today. I'll certainly do my best to get it wrapped up at 20 minutes after the hour if possible. We are recording today's webinar event. It will be available on our website here sometime probably within the next 24 to 48 hours, maybe sooner. This is, I believe, taken from the A201 workbook, page 28, which really, folks, doesn't have very much on it. It's literally just shows a list of other accounting reports, and that's kind of why we're doing this today. So while this is the list of reports that we're going to be looking at is taken from this particular page in that accounting workbook, there really isn't any detail or breakdown in the workbook itself. So that really doesn't provide much insight here, which is why I'm doing the presentation here for us today. If you have questions, please type those into the questions portion of the webinar control panel. I'll do my best to keep an eye on that. I'm pretty good about repeating those questions so everyone understands what's being asked, and we'll see what we can't do to get those questions answered. Please keep the questions on topic, meaning about, in this case, our accounts payable reports that we're going to be discussing. If you have other questions about Church Windows, please call our support staff or email us questions, or maybe there's another future webinar that will be better suited to answer some of the questions you have, or maybe look in the help files. Okay, so let's dive in here. So when we go into accounting, it's accounts payable reporting, and that's essentially what we're talking about today. And the reason is when we go up here to reports and right here to worksheets, we see a list, an option at the top of our worksheets menu called accounts payable. Okay, Church Windows is a payable or an accrual accounting system, and so it has some unique features as they pertain to accounts payable, accounts we owe. And so the accounts payable portion reporting of this makes sense based on the fact that we have a payable or accrual accounting system such as ours. Okay, so the accounts payable itself only reports on vendors that are listed under accounts payable, the accounts payable ledger account. What I mean by that is if we go to manage accounts here in the middle and we scroll down into our liabilities, and we see this 200 account right here. It may be a little hard for you to see. Let me get my highlighter here. 2.20.100 called accounts payable, okay? When we click the plus sign next to accounts payable, the ledger liability, all of our individual vendor accounts pop up. That's what those accounts payable reports report on, okay? Just these sub-ledger accounts, these vendors with no account numbers, just account names that are listed under accounts payable. The accounts payable reports don't list or report on any of these other 200 separate liability accounts, okay? So that's a real fundamental difference in terms of what these accounts payable reports report on versus other reports that may report on the separate liabilities for things like pension or taxes or, wedding deposits or, any of these other liability accounts. They're not going to be included under these accounts payable reports. So let's look at those. So when we go back up to reports and export worksheets and we click on accounts payable, first thing, and folks, I rely on this, one or two of these reports really heavily in my support calls with you. So if we could kind of get our highlighter again and we look down here, it says report type. Notice here, report type. And then below that, there are 4 radio buttons. These are 4 different types of accounts under accounts payable, okay? It simply happens to highlight choose the first one called accounts payable list, okay? We can run the accounts payable reports for any accounting year we want right from the accounts payable options page. but we're going to kind of take a couple minutes and look at each one of these reports in terms of what they report and how they can help benefit you, okay? First of all, accounts payable list. This is probably the report I use most commonly on my support calls. Why? Because I get a lot of calls and respond to a lot of calls where folks call me and they say, Josh, I've got a balance under my accounts payable ledger account on my balance sheet, and I have no idea what that balance represents, okay? So the first report that I take folks to is this accounts payable list report. It will simply show me a list of any vendor with a balance and any unpaid invoices that have a balance or have any unpaid invoices. So typically, if we're just interested in seeing which vendors in my accounts payable ledger have a balance, I'm going to uncheck Show Unpaid Invoices and include vendors with a zero balance. Once I've chosen that and simply click Print, it lists any sub-ledger vendor that makes up that accounts payable. There could be vendors in here that have negative balances too. But simply we would print this report, then I can begin my investigation into each one of these particular vendors and, seeking an explanation as to why the balance exists. If we close out and we go back to, say, checking Show Unpaid Invoices and we click Print, it will bring up any vendor with a balance that also happens to have an outstanding invoice. Okay? So if there's an outstanding bill here, it's going to show. Whether it has an invoice number or a due date, it doesn't matter at all. Okay? So we notice here some have invoice numbers but no due dates, but there's a bill outstanding. Some have no invoice number but have a due date. Okay? And even in some cases, like as we see down here, Paper Plus at the bottom, it's got no invoice number and no due date. There is simply an outstanding bill. Okay? So this report will provide a lot of information as to vendors, specific questions you have about vendors, whether they've got outstanding invoices, whether there's balances in those vendors' accounts, but this will isolate each of those specific individual vendors that we might have questions about that make up the balance under accounts payable. So what I kind of tie this back to is, notice here we've got total unpaid invoices of $6,526. Another way to look at that would be as if I go into Reports, Balance Sheet, run it through July 2021, right here under Accounts Payable. Where is it? Accounts Payable. Right here, let me zoom in a little bit here. It shows down, halfway down the page, near the bottom here on my highlighter, Accounts Payable 6526. So that checks out with what my Accounts Payable list is telling me on my Accounts Payable reports. All right, so those two figures correspond. And most of the time they will, or they should. Not always, but it's pretty rare that they don't. Okay? So if I go back into Accounts Payable, if I want to see all of my vendors, so one of the things that I get a question about periodically is, Josh, I want a list of all of my vendors with their vendor names and the additional information fields I've got about them. So all their names, their addresses, everything here, email, fax number, phone number, web address, everything. You can do that. So we can just simply click Include Vendors with a zero balance. We go to the Fields tab. I just simply double click on any of the fields that I'm wanting to add them to the report. So as I continue to do that, I can add them. There's no select all, but now when I click Print, it'll list every single one of my vendors with the information that I have entered about them here. Or if there's none, like in the case of my Be Sure You're Covered insurance company, I have no address, no phone number, no information other than vendor or account name entered for them. Okay? So you can get a report that includes all of your vendors with all of the information that you have about them. All right? Using that Accounts Payable List report. Let's take a minute and look at our aging report. So this will show us the age of any outstanding bill that I have. Okay, so if we choose the aging report and click Print, it's going to show a list of all of the vendors well, let's take off some of those. Let's get rid of some of that field, those other information fields. Quickly take those off. And we'll go back to print again. And it'll show, again, the unpaid invoice or outstanding invoice for the vendor with the amount and any due date, if applicable, and an invoice number, but it tells me the age of the actual invoice. So in this case, notice here on the left, between 30 and 60 days, more than 90 days, less than 30 days. Okay, so in this case, my Be Sure You're Covered insurance bill, which I've entered as a due date of August 16th, of course, isn't due until the 16th, so that makes sense that it's less than 30 days. And in this case, again, our Paper Plus down here simply has, you know, it's less than 30 days, but it has no invoice number again and no due date. Again, my 6526 matches my total that shows up under my accounts payable ledger on my balance sheet. Depending on how they may or may not be included, but these again, folks, are just my outstanding invoices that are outstanding. All right, let's go back here and let's go look at our show payments due by report. So if you enter a lot of bills on a particular period or month, say, and you want to see which payments are due by a specific date or period, you can use the show payments due by. Okay, I can't stress though enough the importance of the software will not show payments with outstanding invoices with due dates when there's not a due date entered for the vendor or for the bill in this case. Okay, so if I go and let's date this back into the future into August 31st, and I click print, and did I not change the report? I didn't. Show payments due by. Click the button, Josh. There we go. August 31st. So now we click print on show payments due by. We've only got 3 bills showing in this report. Why? Because I've only entered the due date on 3 of those outstanding 6 bills. The other 3 don't have them, so the software can't naturally show me any bills that have no due dates to draw a comparison to. Now, some of them are dated in the past. So notice I've got one here from April 9th or from May 28th. So I don't have to do a future date. I can backdate that. So if I go back and go, okay, I want to see all of my, bills that are bills or show payments due by May 31st and click print, it now only shows the 2 that were actually with due dates up till May 31st. This is particularly helpful, again, if you have a lot of bills that you pay on a monthly basis and you enter the due dates just to make sure that you're not missing those and they're not late. Okay, this is a report that's commonly used, but only for folks who choose to enter the due dates for those particular bills. If maybe they're not working or living on a cash basis, okay, maybe they're entering the bills now and they're going to pay them when they get to a particular period in the month. They're not going to pay them today, but they want to get them entered so they know, but they're not working on a cash basis. They're not entering them and paying them in the same period. They're entering them now and then paying them at some later date. Particularly helpful for folks or churches where they live and work on that kind of accrual basis versus a cash basis. Finally, got a few minutes left here. Frankly, for me, the final report here is our accounts payable journal. Personally, I think this is one of the most underused and underutilized reports in the software, frankly. I can run the accounts payable journal right here to the right. Notice it says type to search. I can click my down arrow. I can choose any vendor that I pay individually from the list. So let's say I choose my electric company, American Electric Power. I can go to my columns tab. I can choose which columns I want to see for them. But then when I simply click print, what this will reveal is any and all transactions that I've posted to that particular vendor, in this case for 2021. So it tells me here's my transaction number, here's my accounts that were affected, the date it occurred, what type of transaction it was, in the case of my payments, if there was a check or invoice number, the amount of the bill, and the running balance. It's virtually a general ledger for the individual vendor account. So right here it shows beginning balance, okay, and then it goes down the list. Get back to my regular drawing tool, goes all the way down, shows there, and then down at the bottom it'll show my beginning balance 0, my current balance is 653, which is the bill I just entered for today's event. So right here at the very bottom, I'm going to scroll down a little more. Let's zoom in a little bit, maybe get some folks some better visual look at this. But what I really like about this report too is also down here. Again, sort of a summary of the vendor account itself. Beginning balance, total charges, bills in this case, total payments, and the current balance. If I choose not to choose a specific vendor, so if I go but close out and I clear out the one single AEP vendor that I've got selected and I simply click print, it will reveal all of my vendors. So Alex's Plumbing, I've got one bill, one payment. So right here, beginning balance 0, charges equal my payments, my current balance for the vendor is 0. But this is the full snapshot of the vendor account and pretty much everything as it pertains or was involved with that particular vendor and its transactions. So if you have a question about do I have, what expense account did I charge, for that particular bill, you can run this report for the vendor and it'll tell you exactly which expense account was debited. It'll also show you which asset account was credited for that. It'll also help tell us whether maybe we've got an outstanding balance and maybe we can use this report to try to figure out and investigate why. That to me is really kind of one of the beauties of a payable system is, when we've got a balance in a vendor somewhere, there's got to be an explanation as to why. Do we have an extra bill? Do we have a missing payment? We have to be able to go through it and match those transactions up, match up those debits and credits to those vendor accounts until we can find out why there is a, remaining deficit or credit balance in that particular vendor account. And again, very similar to our other types of payable reports, you can visit the columns tab on this report and you can take off any of the, columns that are listed under visible columns and move them off of that. So maybe you go, oh, I don't care if I see the check or invoice number. You can double click to take that off, or and you can move these columns back and forth at will to basically it'll remember your column selections but which columns you want to include or omit on the report. It should remember them automatically, folks. Okay. So again, use some of these accounts payable reports, particularly, even if you're working on a cash basis, folks, this report will offer insights for you and will help troubleshoot and help you resolve problems. As I pointed out, particularly the accounts payable list report is one that I use virtually every day on at least a couple to a handful of calls when folks call me with questions about what makes up the accounts payable ledger balance on their balance sheet. Okay. All the other reports are helpful. I don't use them quite as often, but certainly accounts payable journal and accounts payable list I use fairly often. So that is where we're going to wrap up our topic for the day today, everyone.